Okay, respected colleagues, thank you for having. Please come in. Please sit down. Okay, thank you again for your time and to respond to invitation of the organizer to participate in a session dedicated to the status of the social science in the area of fourth industrial revolution. And allow me to introduce myself. I am Goran Bašić. I am director of the Institute of Social Science. And we have paid great attention to the topic of the position, the future of the social science in a recent year. And today, I hope that we will talk about this issue and many others which are dedicated to the social and humanistic science in the contemporary world. And but before the discussion in which we will all participate, we will hear brief 10 minutes presentation by colleagues Dejan Molnar from the Faculty of Economics of University of Belgrade, Paul Spierings from the Ministry of the Infrastructure and Water Management of the Netherlands, and Professor Branko Urošević from Faculty of Economics, also from University of Belgrade. Finally, I will say something about the position of the social sciences and humanities in the modern world, as organizers asked me. But given that we have 1 hour and 4 panelists, I will just briefly make a few, for me, important notes about the social science in and I started that in the case we want to summarize the position of social sciences and humanities and education in the digital age. We can do so by quoting Martin Luther King words. He said, "Our scientific power was outrun our spiritual power. We have guided missiles and misguided men." In contemporary context, education keeps up with development of technology and requirements of the society, thus primarily trying to provide a high level of professionalism and qualification of workers in performing certain jobs. The capability of critical thinking and analytical stance towards social issues are neglected. Man has forgotten about the importance of education for self-esteem, since while profiting from material goods, he needs to be careful and protect himself from their tyranny. If he is weak enough to grow smaller, to fit himself to the covering, then it becomes a process of gradual suicide by shrinking of the soul, as Tagore said. Another line of thinking regarding to the relationship between social sciences and education in the digital age concerns the education in civic competencies and democracy, i.e. nurturing and development of critical thinking. However, many a critical-oriented author, as American philosopher Martha Nussbaum, believes that we are facing a global crisis of education, the crisis which undermines the fundamental values of modern society. Being dedicated to increasing their national profits, modern states in their education systems discard the skills necessary to keep a democracy alive. Should this trend persist, soon the entire world will witness the production of useful machines rather than competent citizens who use their own minds, criticize traditions and modern society, and understand the importance of other people's suffering and achievements. The future of democracy is uncertain. In general, the attention is increasingly paid to education in the context of its contribution to economic growth. Profit motivates governments and companies to invest in development of natural sciences and technologies, as these are believed to be crucial for the stability of a state and progress. The investments into development of technology are not a matter of dispute, but what is worrying is a possibility to neglect, on the wings of the progress, the development of skills that are essential for the vitality of any democracy, as well as for the certain of the creation of the sustainable world's culture capable to constructively engage in solving global problems as pollution, climate changes, forced migration, populism, or xenophobia. These skills are connected to social sciences, humanities, and art. The capability of critical thinking, the ability to overcome the local and, in the area of globalization, to consider global problem as a citizen of the world, and finally, the ability to use one's empathy and understand the adversities faced by the other people. We can already sense the tensions occurring between the concepts of education intended for making profit and education with the purpose of achieving more inclusive citizenship model. To understand the tension which has occurred between nature and man as its rational part, as well as to achieve the balance between them, requires knowledge offered by social science and humanities. New times call for a new paradigm, and its establishment requires for the role of social science instead of their silence and blindness. People understand the changes less and less and find it increasingly hard to adjust to them. Globalization has speed up the pace of changes and pushed people in situations where they lose control over their personal plans. Migrations, violence, dehumanizations are all consequences of the changes that we have faced in the century of technological progress and human rights. There are too many contradictions and dilemmas in order for them to be understood in different parts of the world by people rooted in their own cultures and overwhelmed by a lot of personal and local problems. People find it easier to accept the fact concerning space research than to understand what they need to change in their cultural habitus in order to find footing in this accelerated world. The next point is that no education system is adequately performing its duties if it is benefited from only by rich elites. Availability of high-quality education is an important issue in all modern democracy. Bureaucratized management elites at university all over the world place profit before the research-based knowledge in social science and humanities, which can raise many open questions. The explanations, the economic growth in sine qua non of development, and that because of these IT and technological skills are stimulated through the education system is not enough, since the growth can be obtained in the condition of unevenly accessible education. In many countries, with particular high rate of economic growth, education is unavailable to the poor. This is what's problematic with the development theory based on the GDP per capita. This model generally neglects distribution and favors the state with pronounced social inequalities. This is particularly evident when it comes to education. Taking into account the nature of information, economic states can increase their GDP without paying much attention to distribution and accessibility of education, as long as they are capable of establishing competent technological and business elites. However, can democracy survive in the conditions that entail major inequalities in life chances? Critical thinking, which should be nurtured by social sciences, would not be an essential part of the education oriented towards economic growth. Freedom of thought among students may be dangerous in the intention to create a cohort or technically trained, obtained workers to execute plans made by their leads with the aim of the secure foreign investment and technological progress in the case critical, finally, the education based on the theories of economic growth looks upon the education in art and literature with disdain, since these do not lead to economic progress. As many university, but also the other level of education, arts and humanities study programs are being closed. Furthermore, potential earnings of technology and IT professions multiply exceed those of arts, philosophy, of literature professors. All this make us ask ourselves, what is the price of philosophy and how much did Socrates earn? Thank you very much for your attention. And I invite Professor Molnar to continue with presentation. I think that you are first, yes, according to the program.
Do we need this or okay? Okay. My name is Dejan Molnar. I'm coming from Faculty of Economics, University of Belgrade, and my the area of research and interest beside the regional local economic development is energy economics. And something what is really actual here in Serbia is creating a new industrial policy for next 10 years. And one of the main pillar of this future industrial policy and industrial development in our country is circular economy and low carbon economy as a basis for sustainable development. So I will use this opportunity to raise these topics and to say some facts regarding the situation in our country. The fact is that regarding environmental protection, were not considered as a priority by policymakers in our country in the previous period. Serbia is ranked 37th from 32 countries in Europe in previous year, 2018, according to Yale University report. But there are two ways in which we are somehow pushed to take these topics in our future policy. Chapter 27 for EU accession is an ecological question, and we as a EU candidate have to fulfill some requirements from the European Union, and the other one is market competition. Our companies, industrial companies, producers, in order to be competitive in international markets, should satisfy some rigorous ecological and environmental barriers, let's say. Interesting is that Serbia invested only 0.3% of GDP in the environmental protection, which is less than in the EU and in surrounding countries. Some researchers suggesting that it should be 4 or 5 times more, which means 1.2 or up to 1.4 or 5% of GDP. But my point is that it is not only a cost. We should regard this money as investment, and I will explain later what I mean. The fact is that in Serbia today, every GDP unit is characterized by higher energy consumption and higher CO2 emission compared to the majority of countries in the region in EU. Industrial production in the country is predominantly based on older technologies, which are major environmental pollutants. Insufficient use of energy from renewable resources by industrial entities in the country due to insufficient financial strength, or lack of awareness and possibilities for implementing new technologies in order to save the energy and to save the resources. For example, recycling rates of plastic in our country in 2017 was around 32%, which is much lower than in EU and surrounding countries. For example, regarding metal in the EU, it was almost 80% recycling rate. In our country was 46. Regarding glass, in EU it was 74%. In Serbia it was only 36%. So, as I said, circular economy model, contrary to the linear model, suppose that we use and reuse some, let's say, not say waste, but some products which are not the main product from the linear model of production. Advantages of circular economy concept could be, and in theory are, environmental, social, and economic. Later in discussion we can talk about that. I will not in this moment saying anything more about that, but regarding goals in front of our policymakers today, regarding that next decade should be more sustainable than previous decades, saying that we have to reduce the consumption of raw materials and raw resources, to make a low carbon economic growth, meaning a higher rate of renewable energy resources, and what, according to my personal opinion, on the first place, building a supportive environment for the introduction of a circular economy model. And regarding a supportive environment, today we are here to say something about education. For example, I was in previous months have opportunity to talk with representatives of companies all over the Serbia, and all managers in companies saying that in the country there is not enough awareness of waste management and about possibilities of reusage of and reusing of materials. Something we have to do in next period is to increase the level of waste recycling, increase the degree of wastewater treatment, improving the energy efficiency of industrial and energy plants, especially energy plants, and what means energy transition based on renewable energy sources. But for that, it is necessary to have a relevant knowledge. The state should support the process of developing education and other programs that contribute to the advancement of knowledge by both the general population and industrial representatives. Also, I think that we have to support the capacity building of scientific and educational institutions to work in the energy sector. And also to set the scientific and educational system based on the principles of green, circular, and blue economy also. We're today talking about circular economy, but also the green economy concept and blue economy concepts also open the door for much more implementation of knowledge and models that we can apply in our business processes. Also, the concept of bioeconomy and ecological culture and ecological awareness, it is very important. So today, when Europe is setting course for a resource efficient and sustainable economy, it means that we have to put more attention in developing and transferring in our business models new technologies and processes for the bioeconomy as a base for blue and circular economy models. Then developing markets and competitiveness in bioeconomy sectors, and pushing policymakers and stakeholders to work more closely together. I would like to mention a researcher named by Ginter Pauli. If you have heard for him, yes, he has a book, The Blue Economy, 10 years, 100 innovations, and 100 million jobs. which is example how someone who is a researcher, who is also a professor or teacher, let's say in one book put 20 years experience of business models regarding how environmental problems with, are open source scientific solution based upon physical processes common in the natural world to create solutions that are both environmentally beneficial and which have financial and wider social benefits. Also the other main thing in our circumstances here in Serbia that we really have to raise the awareness of the people, households, families, young people, and then on the other, as the outcome, it will come that you have to improve the business models and the production as such. So without education and primary level, and in the other hand, possibilities that offers actual industrial revolution, the fourth industrial revolution, regarding the, let's say, building the potential to use knowledge and innovations in existing processes in order to save the energy and save the resources. Because Serbia is not a rich country, as during the previous period we learned in schools. Unfortunately, it is not like that, so we have to have in mind that and to implement these potentials I was talked about in our future industrial policy and supporting the business model in the future. So for the introduction, I do not know if I have used my 6, 7, 8 minutes, but I'm here to discuss with you if you are interested for more and go deeper in some details regarding the existing position and future possibilities for building circular economy model in Serbia. And I have to conclude with my personal opinion that I am also I'm not believe too much that we can in next 10 years make some great progress here in Serbia, because as I mentioned the figures, we are on the very, very low level, but we have to prepare ourselves for the future, building the knowledge, building the awareness, and preparing for some sustainable industrial model, let's say, in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Molnar, for your interesting lecture. And the next panelist is our guest from
the Netherlands.
Netherlands,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Yeah. I have no slides, no PowerPoint presentation. I just want to tell you a story. My personal story on education and learning. There's no general conclusion from this story. It's just my personal. That's okay. Well, let me first introduce myself. Does anyone hear me? Is it too loud or no? It's fine. Okay, because I hear myself double. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Spierings. I'm 68. I'm a husband. I'm a father of 2 and a grandfather of 3. And recently I retired. After graduating as an engineer, mechanical engineer, very basic, solid job, I started my professional career at Volvo Car, producer of cars. First on as a specialist, of course, and gradually I grew into management functions. After, let's say, 10 years, 5 years of management experience, I really realized I didn't have enough knowledge of human behavior. I was head of a department, all clever people, hard-working people, energetic people. There was no lack of money, and we agreed to do great things. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, everything Everyone had done something, but not what we agreed to. And not by exception, but time after time. And that wondered me. How comes this happens? Why do people, it's almost if they refused to cooperate. And if we talked about it, okay, yes, it was a misunderstanding, and we made new appointments, and we agreed to leave this room and all go to the right. The only certainty that anyone would go to the right if there was no other way out than to the right. That puzzled me. And it even got worse when I was appointed head of quality in Volvo. And at that moment, I was thinking about quality, and I realized quality is not just meeting in advanced agreed standards, but also quality is more on let's say, fulfilling implicit expectations that rise afterwards. Quality is much on perception. And from perception, I didn't have any knowledge at all as an honest engineer, nor did my colleagues have. That's why I started studying psychology. And studying psychology was for me, in retro perspective, in looking behind, it was a treasure house full of very useful information. To quote Kurt Lewin, nothing more practical than a good theory. It gave it to me. But entering the university studying psychology, there was no sign like in a train. Mind the gap. Ping, ping, mind the gap. Be warned. There was no warning sign in this study psychology. I don't know if it's others in other schools, but the first 2 years of my education, psychology, I didn't understood what they were telling me. It were all regular, normal words, but they had no meaning. I was completely lost in translating it. And after managing that problem, minding the gap, I was very successful. I could practice what I learned at school, and the most striking thing for me to learn was, first of all, was de-learning. Going back, getting rid of all kinds of ideas I had, like that everything is to be calculated in advance. Uncertainty is not a disaster. Uncertainty is part of life, and you can use it very successfully. So I had to get rid of my belief in universal truth and reality. I had to accept the importance of language. Language creates truth. Language creates meaning, and that was, for me, striking. But in time, I learned to do it. What was even more striking for me is that having a shared meaning was even the most important. And that a shared meaning, a social construct, can be constructed. And that was helpful for me as an engineer, because constructions I knew something about. What I gained was tools for better understanding, for understanding that every coin has two sides, a predictable and an unpredictable side. And that was really meaningful for me. After learning this, when I was 50, I moved to Rijkswaterstaat. Rijkswaterstaat is, what you told me, is the organization in Holland, in the Netherlands, that's on behalf of Dutch government in charge of water quality and quantity, protecting us from flooding, taking care of enough drinking water of good quality, and for the main infrastructure. Bridges, dikes, roads, weirs, whatever you call them. Rijkswaterstaat is a very robust organization, founded in 1792, meaning it was a merger in 1792 from a lot of local organizations, and the organization is even older than the Kingdom of the Netherlands. It's an organization dominated by engineers, so I felt very at home. Yeah. What I learned again, at Rijkswaterstaat, was what I learned also in my study of psychology on the both sides of the coins, that a dike, a bridge, or whatever, not just is a solid mechanical construction. It is also a social alteration of an existing organism. What is helpful to one side of the coin is not necessarily also helpful to the other side of the coin. Let me give you an example. There was a problem with a highway in a very densely populated area. A lot of noise. So what we did is we made a ditch, put that highway down in that ditch, put a roof on it, and we had a highway in a tunnel, no disturbance from noise. Two sides of the road, two neighborhoods, very happy. At least that's what we thought. Problem solved, we can go home. But unfortunately, that wasn't so. One side of the road was a very prosperous neighborhood. High house prices, wealthy people, etc., etc. The other side, night. And on that roof of that tunnel, we created a park with trees and grass and anything. And that meant the two sides, the two neighborhoods that never were interacted, were connected at a certain moment. And that had a very, very strange, for us, surprising effect. The planning for the tunnel construction we did in a time of recession. The work was carried out at the moment that the economy was booming. And booming economy in the Netherlands mean house prices. Meaning that the people of the richer part could easily move through the park to the other side, and they could afford very cheap houses and very low rents. Meaning that the people living in the cheap houses were pushed away. So instead of solving a noise problem, we drove them away from their own houses. What problem did we solve? That's again an example. And that even was worse for us. Because we are working on behalf of Dutch government, that means we are civil servants. But at that moment, we literally didn't serve society. We disserved them. And on the other hand, of course, it's not good for the social support of our organization. If they come, you can leave your house. That's the story we told them. That's again two sides of one medal. One easy, predictable side, the construction, and one, for us, unpredictable side, the effect on house prices. And what I realized at that moment and before also is that there are not only two sides of the coin, there are a lot of sides of the coin. One is just the construction side, and the other is the house prices side, but there's also financial side, and the legal side, and the political side, and the whatever you can call it, because every construction is an intervention in a social organism, and especially at this moment when finances are short, also in the Netherlands, you bring in all kind of other consortia financing it, and that gives a new information. So, what to do? How to deal with predictability and unpredictability? And can it, and what can you do with it? And for the future, we see more and more of these things. So all the things that are called here today are also going for Rijkswaterstaat, climate change. Climate change means climate is doing other things than we did the last years. And that for an organization that's building dikes for hundreds of years have to rethink of their way they do it. And with the last 20 years, we are experimenting with not building dikes, but with removing dikes, giving land back to the water. That's a big step for the engineers that are trained in building dikes. But it's even a larger step for the people living there. Suppose you're living nicely on the side of the river or on the coast, and that one day there's an engineer knocking at your door and he's telling you, sorry sir, but you have to remove. We are flooding your property. Yeah, how to explain that in a decent way. That's not easy. A lot of these things, autonomous driving, smart data analysis, it does a lot to our organization. And how do we learn to do all these things? How do we learn to see all kind of sides on one coin? Okay, then as a last, yes, it's my last remark. When preparing for this meeting, a dear friend wrote me a mail and asked me, and I'll quote what he said, "What kind of initial education in engineering would have prepared your career, and what initial education of social scientists would help them prepare for collaborating with engineers?" It's a very legitimate question, and I really was thinking about it. But honestly, I don't have a clue. I don't know. I even asked myself, would it for me personally have been possible to do so? And the answer must be no. When I was 20s and I started my engineering education, I wasn't vulnerable at all for social science. It was way too complicated. It doesn't help you. Why should you bother for doing it? It was a matter of maturing. Before maturing and seeing real problems that engineering couldn't help me, that I was able to make the mental shift to changing it. So I guess, and the two educations were complementary for me. There was no overlap. It were two completely different educations on a different language. So I guess I have to rephrase the question to what kind of education can speed up maturing and open someone's mind for the other side of the medal? And even more, what can help speaking two languages? Because that's the problem. And putting an interpreter, a translator in between doesn't help, in my opinion. No, I'm an engineer. And an engineer says, if you need a support construction for something you made something wrong. So stop support constructions. And a translator is a support construction. You have to, at least one of the two has to speak the language of the other. I hope you can answer this question for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Then you share these very interesting and inspirative speeches, and I think very useful for the social scientists. And our last panelist is Professor Urošević.
So it would be very hard to speak after such a great speaker like Paul. But wanted to confirm his words in some ways, because I started with absolute this interest in social sciences. I was a physicist, went to the special school in mathematics here. I went to Moscow studying theoretical physics and all that. I was sure that I'm going to do physics all my life. And then after I got my PhD, I realized I'm actually interested in other things, and I wasn't sure what it was. So I took 1 year, and I took 1 year under the influence of a friend of mine who was a Japanese professor at Brown, where I did my PhD in physics, and I took actually 1 year of economics. And I really got interested in that. And then I ended up in a consulting firm in Chicago, and I worked there for a couple of years, and I got interested in the business world. And then I said, okay, well, why don't I do another PhD? So I ended up getting a PhD in finance. And then I realized basically after all of that I will keep learning. You know, I thought at the beginning that as a true theoretician, I should never use a computer except to type a paper, that I should never do programming because this is for those who cannot solve things, you know, in closed formulas. And then, you know, I realized later on that programming is maybe the most fascinating thing. And so the past 7-8 years, I was doing a lot of programming. And I'm teaching economists how to program and solve economic problems using programming. So, you know, it's hard to predict what your own life is going to look like, especially somebody else's life. And what you need now, I mean, who the hell knows what we need 40 years from now? I mean, not us, but, you know, what kids now need 40 years from now. So one thing is for sure, it is very uncertain. And now what I'm doing lately, I'm still doing economics, but I got very much interested in artificial intelligence from a particular perspective, actually humanistic perspective. We are looking into the natural language processing and understanding of language. So a little bit connection to this, but we are trying to formalize this understanding of language. And there is a group of us, of which there is a psychologist and sitting in this room here. And then there is me, and there are a bunch of other very clever people of different walks of life, and only some of them are programmers, and many of them are some very different professions. And basically, what we have been doing, we have been trying to figure out how to build the systems that can develop cause and consequence type of statements and semantic question-answer systems and so on. So let me explain a little bit why this is interesting. Like, we all are using Google, more or less, or some equivalent to Google all the time, and yet this is based not on semantic search, it is based on keywords. And in the keywords, you can have, for example, a horse and a mare, which are semantically obviously extremely close, they are kind of husband and wife, to be completely different, basically unrelated concepts. And so what we are trying to figure out how to actually talk about semantics in this sense. So it is building on some ideas that have been in development since 2013. And actually Google was starting with this, and now we took over some of the stuff they were doing, and they moved on to something that we think is a little bit a misdirection. And so we are trying to build up the following system. So when we think about the semantics, this is important to understand what we are doing. We are trying to map from one set of objects, let's say words, which are actually not so well defined, because we have dictionaries, but dictionaries explaining words in terms of other words, and then those words in terms of the other. So they are kind of circular explanations of words. And then there is the notational semantics, where we talk about concepts such as concept of chairs or concept of table or whatever. But we are interested in is this distributional semantics. So in other words, how are words used? In which context are they used? And what words are used with which other words, and this helping us understand the words, and then somehow do something mathematical with them, which I'm going to describe, which is going to be quite helpful, it seems to us. So, for example, you can ask a question, so what is the likelihood that some word comes after the word the in English? It can be anything. It's impossible to predict. But if you have the word Costa, well, it can be probably only something that is related to some name, if it is with a capital C. So it can be some Spanish names of various beaches and so on. It can be Costa Cafe that was working here, but there is a much smaller number of possibilities. And then if you take, for example, the word Rica, with R-I-C-A, there is only one word in English dictionary that comes with it before, which is Costa Rica. So not everything is unpredictable. And so what we are trying to do is to map the words into vectors in a sufficiently large space of dimensions, and in such a way so that basically these vectors have very small angle with each other, so they're very close, provided that these are semantically close concepts. And it is kind of remarkable that that can be done. I mean, this is weird. When you get it, you still don't believe it. So the number of meaningful combinations is huge, but it is not infinite. It is wrong to think that it is. And so actually it turns out about 300 to 400 dimensions can be enough. And we have some algorithms of what should be the right type of dimensions. And so the algorithm works like this. So we are talking about words. They are appearing in text. We need to take a whole lot of words. And then we are trying to maximize the probabilities that words that come together, briefly speaking, not too far from each other, are actually appearing, close by. And so then we basically parameterize this kind of model by mapping each of these into these vectors. And so now, for example, what was surprising, when you take the vector for the word king, and then you literally subtract the vector for the word man, and then you add the vector for the word woman, you get the vector which is extremely close to the word queen. And then you can say, well, what we get is we get out of this huge corpus, we get unique representation for each word of the corpus. Now you can say, well, how can this be? Because you have mentioned that there are so many ways in which we can understand words. And it's, so here, for example, the word bank. So what is a bank? If you just say bank, it can be anything. Can be bank shot in basketball, can be, blood bank, can be bank account, can be all kinds of stuff. Well, it turns out this is the clue. The clue is when you start adding more vectors, in other words, adding more words, you get more and more, you're kind of converging more and more toward the smaller and smaller space in this vector space that is more and more particular what the meaning is. So, for example, you can start with the word bank, then you add the word account, then you add the word internet, and you are getting actually much more precise. So that is the very simple concept. So you can actually use this to create things like question and answer systems. So we can start with a sentence like Belgrade is the capital of Serbia. It consists of these words. We know the vectors for each of them. You can create, put together, you sum up the vectors, you get the vectors for the sentence. Then you subtract the word Belgrade. So what you get is the capital of Serbia. Okay? Then you add the word what, a vector for that. And then you get what is the capital of Serbia, but you know the answer. So you can do that with objects, with predicates, and so on. And you can create, because you map each word into a particular vector, not independent on the context, basically you can get the question and answer systems that can be very fast and scalable. And this is something that we are currently having a working prototype. So, but there are issues. So lots of the work done in this area is done in English. So all these texts are typically in English. The crawling internet is, to the most part, it is text in English and so on. But there are so many other languages. There is Dutch, there is Serbian, Croatian, whatever. Turns out that in Croatia and Slovenia, they are working on computational linguistics of the Serbian language, including Cyrillic Serbian language, but not here. So our group is considering actually probably at some point dealing with that. But since we are starting, we have started with English because this is the easiest to get the raw materials. It's an important issue. So one broader issue would be the following. So the humanistic sciences cannot be separated from these technologies or from the natural sciences. There is no way in which you can do it in any natural way. So basically, all these separations are kind of artificial, and so we need to learn from each other. We are benefiting certainly with the knowledge of people who are not computer scientists or whatever, because none of us are linguists, unfortunately, so we need to talk to more, but we have people who are expert on the language in other aspects. And so we need all these different knowledge types to understand things. And this is true probably of pretty much any area. And one of the things that we want to develop, which is also, there is a working prototype for that, is this reasoning graph, which basically you ask a question and then it can give you why something happened. And then based on kind of having this accumulated knowledge, world knowledge from the internet, which is continuously being crawled and parsed, what we get is basically these various statements which says this happened because of that, and that other thing happened because of this, and so on. And you can assign certain probabilities of what of these explanations make sense. But this obviously can revolutionize the way we think, because it can force us to really hone more our critical thinking, because you get some kind of benchmark ideas, but then you can ask yourself, whether this makes sense and so on. So you can do a lot of things with it. Obviously, it is not going to do your thinking for you, but it's going to give you a bunch of interesting stuff to work with. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Professor Urošević. And now I'm sure that